Welcome to the TMRN Time Monk Radio Network. I'm Jules, and today's Friday, the 23rd of September 2011. Today from Ecuador we have researcher Alex Putney. Alex reveals the ancient Sanskrit mandala as a nonlinear geometric model of consciousness, the unified field reflecting the octagonal symmetry of prime numbers. His website is humanresonance.org. Hi Alex, welcome to the WebBot Forum Roundtable.
Hi, Jules. Thanks for having me. It's great to be able to share this information with a whole new group of people who I haven't been able to address before.
Fantastic. It's good for you to frequent with us as well. The WebBot Forum administrator and producer of the show is Fox, and he'll be doing the recording and technical support of the show. Several members of the forum were kind enough to join us tonight. They include members Gemini, Green Meadow, Five Cook, and Parry, known as Periwinkle on the forum. For listeners, this interview will assume you have a good understanding of Alex's work. Alex has numerous articles and free ebooks on his website, www.humanresonance.org. This interview will be available on YouTube for free on the WebBot Forum channel and at the website webbotforum.com. Alex, are you comfortable and ready for the interview, sir?
Yeah, definitely. Let's go for it.
Great. The first area or topic we're going to be discussing is planetary resonance or new vibrations. Alex, as we approach 2012, in your articles on Hunabku and the Tzolk'in calendar, you expect the endless magnetic streams of life force flowing in perfect geometric proportion through our planet and our bodies. This includes the Earth's magnetic field to reverse and a downshifting of planetary resonance from 8 Hz to 1.45 Hz. Your research shows that 1.45 Hz promotes entrainment between the hypothalamus, pituitary, and pineal centers of the brain. Can you explain what you think this change in the planet's resonance will do to people? Will it enable survivors to be able to walk in ki or chi as they walk in a perpetual alpha state without the need to meditate or take psychedelic substances? Please tell us what you expect from this resonance change.
Well, that's a lot to think about, and I definitely have been thinking about it a lot. And I've come up with some answers that I don't think most people have considered. And a lot of them have to do with the experiences that I'm having right now in my life. And I'm seeing these as being harbingers of the changes that we're going to be all seeing in a more explicit way. Right now, the changes we're seeing are very subtle. But we have individuals around the world like myself, and there are others like Daniel Tammet, who's a synesthete, is the name given to individuals who experience what's called a state of synesthesia, which is a linking of the senses where the experiences of sounds, words, numbers, colors are linked to other experiences and perceptions. So the mathematical abilities that people like Daniel Tammet demonstrate very clearly, and for myself, the mathematical work that I put together on my website, these things are things that we've arrived at through a state of synesthesia that's induced by the changes that are happening on our planet. So it's a long word, and it's a tough concept to realize, but I think everyone in their own experience has moments of this. And, there are all kinds of moments where we have telepathic breakthroughs with people, where we're communicating over distances, where we're having intuitions that save the lives of others, save our own lives, coincidences that bring us towards health. And I think these positive effects of these changes are what I'm most interested in. Obviously, we have people out there who are doomsdayers, who are themselves falling apart in the chaos that is really taking this planet by storm right now. So the main concept that I want to address here that involves these changes has to do with the resonance change on the planet and the different levels of the acoustic throughput of our planet that's really causing the state of consciousness that people are experiencing. So when we think about the consciousness and the mind and how these interact with the planetary changes, we really have to understand how cell phones work, because that can be used as a springboard to be able to understand how our own consciousness works. Now, when two cell phones are trying to communicate with each other, they need to be synchronized by a cell phone tower. So there's a certain frequency that's being used to communicate, and these phones that are all on the same network that can communicate with each other are using these distinct frequency ranges. And they're also synchronized within those ranges. So all of the phones have a pulse that is shared. So this concept, most people don't even realize when they use their phone, but in fact, this same concept underlies telepathic communication as I understand it. And I think the pyramids are the key to understanding that connection, because the pyramids, in my opinion, act as the wireless tower does, synchronizing cell phones. Only the pyramids are synchronizing consciousness and telepathic communication over distances. And so what I mean by that is, if you have the pyramid initiate in an ancient culture living in Teotihuacan, in what's presently in Mexico, this pyramid has the same base length and has the same resonant frequency as the Great Pyramid in Giza, Egypt. And so although these pyramids are on opposing sides of the planet, although not completely opposite, they maintain a certain mathematical distance from one to another, and we see this distance through all the pyramids of the world represented in relationship to certain magic numbers, which, on my website it's given in maps in 3D form and in GPS locations. And that complex structure underlies my understanding of how the brain works, and that the synchronization of these units of the pyramids were in fact exactly done in the way that we are synchronizing the cell phone towers today for cell phone use. So in my mind, when we talk about 2012, it's really the frequency change of our planet that is going to boost our telepathic ability. And when we look at the present 8 hertz state, or near 8 hertz, fluctuating around there, that is actually a baseline of the Schumann resonances, the planetary resonance of Earth. And there are, in fact, at intervals of 5.9 hertz, going above and in harmonics and below in subharmonics that extend, and there are 30 frequencies that together form the Earth resonance. And so my understanding and my prediction is that in 2012, the base lengths of the pyramids around the world will, especially the Great Pyramid of Giza, will be engaging and mitigating the energies that are moving through our planet at that time from an outside source, and the 1.5 level or 1.4 hertz level subharmonic of the 7 hertz base signal will actually be gaining in strength. And I believe that that heartbeat resonance will be creating all of these telepathic changes that we're experiencing right now, and as well synesthesia.
Great, Alex. Just a follow-up. Alex, Cliff High of the Webbots in his latest report sees a change in time as we perceive or know it. He's calling it temporal ownership. Most also know of Terence McKenna's concept of the eschaton for 2012. What does your research show about the time, and how the resonance shift you expect will impact, change, alter time, if at all?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've thought about that a lot, and I think that all of our basic, what we think of as basic fundamentals of time, space, and even more fundamental things like atomic decay rates, evaporation rates, those things are found to fluctuate with solar flares. So I think as we look at the future right now, we can project, according to the Mayan calendar, intense solar activity for the next solar maximum in 2012. And I think definitely for that, the precedent is already being set when we look at clockworks, for example. On my website, I present information where in, I believe it's in Sicily, they're having severe problems maintaining clocks and keeping time together, because literally the mechanisms are not functioning the same and they're all losing coherence. So I find it very interesting, not only that they're not maintaining coherence with each other and the rest of the world, but even in little pockets, there's no consistency. So it seems to me like right now we have the same thing with the South Pole, for example. We have multiple South Poles forming. And in South Africa, there's a South Pole there that compasses go haywire around at different times of the year according to solar activity. So these changes definitely are not only affecting the way clocks are measuring things, and that's both digital and analog clocks, I believe, but also the way our own bodies are registering time. For example, the cellular clock that so many people talk about as being wound a certain way or having a certain period, or the circadian rhythms that we experience and the seasons of our planet, they're all shifting right now. And so I think definitely when we look towards the future, I'm definitely envisioning one where we have different conditions environmentally that affect human aging cycles as well. So there are so many changes to speak of that we're really looking at the beginning of our perception of time here. And the Mayan calendar tells us that this cycle is ending, but the new cycle has yet to be set. The new quantum state has yet to be seen. And that's what's so fascinating to me.
Yeah, those compass effects, Alex. I mean, could they also be the harbinger of possible multiple poles causing, or which obviously to its final extent would be a magnetic pole flip?
I do think so. And inevitably, all the models show that the poles do go haywire, and there are multiple north and south poles during the reversal. And I think certainly we're going to a higher energy state because I believe there's a blast wave of energy approaching us. And the Mayans speak of this as the galactic superwave that synchronizes all of the solar activities and that's pulsed from the center of our galaxy. So when I look at the future changes and this galactic wave striking and moving through our solar system, and the prophecies that are given to us by these cultures that knew about these changes from previous epochs in history, from information that was passed out from people alive at those times, those coherent transmissions really, for me, set the stage and allow me to envision the positive aspects of what's happening in the future rather than the negative aspects of the end of a calendar. What does that mean? That means the calendar does not track time beyond a certain date, and they know why that is. And so the Mayan calendar, for me, is the answer. Ancient knowledge in general and the way it interfaces to explain these questions, coincides with what Nikola Tesla was telling us and coincides with what solar physicists can understand today, or plasma physicists specifically, who understand a lot more, I think, about the universe and about energy, because magnetic fields from plasma are much more intense than the gravity from matter that we see in our universe. So astronomers who are obsessing with objects and missing the plasma factors in the universe and don't understand how plasma works in a laboratory, these astronomers can't give us the data we need to understand these changes. And yet plasma physicists and ancient Mayan astronomers definitely can provide answers.
Thank you, Alex. Talking about that, and obviously in the last few months, we've been getting hit by severe geomagnetic storms. Alex, in your work, you talk about the Maya cosmology and Tlaloc, god of celestial waters associated with growth and memory, and sacred waters identified with memory, wisdom, ascension, and prayer. I have often wondered about the meaning of stories like the Tower of Babel. As humans are electrically charged beings, could there have been events that caused a mass amnesia or scrambling of our minds in the past, perhaps because of the magnetic field flipping or the resonance change? Can individuals avoid such a fate perhaps by covering oneself in a Faraday cage, drinking the light water and grounding oneself barefoot to the earth? Or is this memory loss part of transformation, a requirement of universe, a forgetting of the old so the new can be reborn?
Well, I think it's a combination of those things for sure, and we are definitely experiencing a learning cycle because of the environmental changes. And I think it's certainly tied closely with karma because these changes are coming about, I believe, and the drastic changes that we're experiencing, I believe, came about because of decisions that were made by by us in our previous lives, and we're all gathered here at this point to receive and be able to convert that karma into what we choose for it to be, not what it was in the previous decision-making. When I think about the environmental changes that happen in these swings from high resonance to low resonance that we see on the planet throughout the history of the lithosphere, we have records of this through the magnetic field changes recorded in the stone and the lava. And what we see basically is a picture of changing environmental conditions that's quite like what the Nahuatl cultures of North America are telling us in their cosmologies. So the Hopi, for example, as well as the Maya and the other Pima, Zuni, all these tribes that are related to the same traditions, provide, the Hopi specifically provide us with three epochs or three cycles that the Earth has been through in its incarnations. Let's say, or three resonant states of the planet, and they talk about this as a series of different worlds. And the first world was they described in purple light, and the North Pole faced the sun itself. And that's fascinating because purple, of course, is one of the, or ultraviolet certainly is one of the frequencies of light most prominent in water vapor, which surrounds our planet. And then they're ending that were in the yellow light of the sun, where the North Pole was perpendicular to the plane of the ecliptic, and as well off in some of those worlds were no longer perpendicular. So there were several different worlds that had the yellow sun. And then they conclude that we are now approaching the third phase of creation, which involves an atmosphere that has red light. And I think the acoustic changes as well as the luminal changes in our atmosphere are what dictate these effects of high to low resonance, which really create chromosomal changes. And I think the fact that we have far fewer chromosomes than the great ape species really shows us that something special is going on, or something quite unusual is going on with the human chromosome.
Thank you, Alex. A drop of from 8 hertz roughly to 1.45 hertz is a large drop in the Schumann resonance. Talking about the three resonances in the past that you were just describing, interestingly, an expanding Earth planet with a longer diameter matches why the Schumann resonance may drop, as frequency is inversely related to the Earth's diameter. What do you think of the expanding Earth theory, and can you elaborate on the consequences of a change in resonance?
Yeah, I've actually thought about that theory a lot, and my conclusion is that it may be happening, and that may be an accurate picture, that the Earth is expanding, but I think perhaps on a longer time scale that I'm speaking of, because the changes I'm referring to, the Hopi at least speak of the red dawn, that this change will happen overnight and will be permanent from that morning on for thousands of years. So when I look at the resonance changes in the planet, first of all, we have to understand what the Schumann resonance are composed of, because that term resonance is given because it's not just a single frequency. It's a resonance or a set of harmonics and subharmonics from a frequency that's the most loud and prominent, and that's the one that's mostly mentioned by people, which is fluctuating around 8 hertz, and goes down to about 7.2, 7.3 hertz, and swings higher as well. So that's actually just one of the base frequencies, and the whole Schumann resonances is a set that's over 30 frequencies simultaneously recorded all the time, and they fluctuate in their levels, but more or less they correspond to frequency steps that are separated by about 5.9 hertz. So if we look at these a sequence of these steps, of course they're changing all the time, they're fluctuating, but we might have a set of frequencies that if you go below 7.3 hertz, you get to the 1.45 hertz range if you subtract the 5.9 hertz. So that's the human heartbeat range, which is one of the resonant frequencies of the planet, but is actually a subharmonic of the dominant frequency of the planet. So my thinking is that the changes will not necessarily involve the Earth's diameter shifting drastically, but in fact the fundamental frequency of the Schumann frequencies will start to be reflected in a deeper 1.4 hertz range rather than the 7 to 8 hertz range that's present now. So it's going to be very interesting to watch and see what happens and try to record these changes if our instruments are able to do so.
And how would it affect people personally, do you think? What would be the effects would be then?
Well, the Hopi, I think, give us very clear analysis of what the ancient Atlantean cultural beliefs were and what the prophecies refer to in these changes as regards human experience. they tell us that the messages will be sent, the Hopi specifically tell us in their prophecies that messages will be received and the twins will allow a change to occur in each and every form of life. That this change will be determined by many factors, and that there will be, they also speak of things that will be felt but not seen. And of course, this sounds very strange, but if you understand the acoustic changes as relating to low-frequency sound hotspots, as I've been able to show through my research, then it makes sense that you can find places on the planet where, as they've told us, certain temples, certain lifestyles are conducive to activation and spiritual achievement. And in fact, the temples of these ancient cultures, for example, the kivas of the Hopi and these mud houses, were designed specifically to keep the earth pulse moving through the human bodies that were in these places, through barefoot and through natural skin moccasins and things like that. So the ancient knowledge corresponds to what we're measuring now, because we have measurements from solar flare activity. As recently on my website I pointed out, I think a week and a half ago, there was a solar flare event that was directly recorded by instruments and that measured both the magnetic shock wave of the CME arriving at Earth, the mass ejection, coronal mass ejection, but they also recorded the ground electrical surges in the electrical ground state. So that right there corresponds to ancient knowledge showing us that the equipment that is now, for example, railroad tracks, large pipelines that are crisscrossing the ground are in fact not able to handle the high-intensity electrical surges that are occurring. And of course, I've tracked on my website stories that show this as a fact. And in Nairobi recently, in Kenya, there was a massive petroleum pipeline blast. And then I believe it was reported yesterday that in Subiang Jaya, which is just south in Kuala Lumpur, these explosions, they had a gas main explosion, methane. So these explosions are going to continue to happen, and throughout my work with the website, I'm trying to link the events that show that these are in fact related to solar activities. And so the human changes on our scale have to do with lifestyle changes so that we can use ancient knowledge to be able to receive these energies appropriately. And the ancient traditions give us those, building techniques and temple styles all over the world we see where there's an ancient way to do things that we're not adhering to today, and I think is a key for future survival and to thrive in these changes.
Thank you, Alex. Talking about the humans navigating these changes and lifestyle changes and techniques, you talk about silver nanoparticles in the 1 to 10 nanometer range inhibiting a virus's ability to survive in the human body. Ancient texts talk about the philosopher's stone coming in two forms, the white stone that transmutes any metal into silver and the red stone that transmutes any metal into gold. It seems gold and silver is far more important than what we have been led to believe and far more valuable than just a method of currency. Can you elaborate from your research what other uses these metals, gold and silver, have in special forms? And do you believe, as per Jay Widener's research, that there is an elixir of life that can be brewed into water and to form and provide the person that ingests it eternal life?
I do, and I read extensively in my books and a little bit on my website about the waters that are found in the spring, the sacred springs here in the mountain of Lamana, where I'm developing an Ayurvedic center right now. And these waters certainly have been replicated in some of their aspects in laboratories around the world. And in fact, in North America, I myself was making gold and silver colloids with the same very tiny particle size of about 10 nanometers or smaller, that's able to pass through the aquaporons of the cells of the body. So this water we have here now, we're going to be adding more gold, enriching the water with more gold and silver. And in fact, we're looking towards developing applications with chocolate and things like that. So there are many ways that ancient people were enriching their foods, and of course manna bread is one I speak about in my books and has in fact been mentioned in some extraterrestrial contacts, interestingly enough. The key to these particles that really connects with the Kundalini tradition of Sanskrit cultures, I believe, has to do with their effect, which has been measured scientifically as what's called electroluminescence, which refers to the property of these particles in these sizes that allow them to convert an electrical current passing through them into pulses of light that are determined by, of course, the current itself that's put through. But the silver particles produce a blue light, whereas the gold nanoparticles produce a red light, and different frequencies can be attained by tuning the particle size. So these fascinating characteristics of what have been spoken about, I believe, in ancient texts as well as extraterrestrial contacts are now something we can use in the home today. And I've been using simple 9-volt batteries to produce these colloids and use them effectively for healthcare for myself, my family, and those I care about. So there's a lot of information about how those things have been used publicly. But what I end up doing is encouraging people to make colloidal baths that they put electrodes into and receive a 9-volt battery pulse through their, for example, a foot bath, while they're drinking these colloids. And I think that's the best, the easiest and most effective way of allowing energy from the earth to pulse through your body when you are, grounding directly with the earth is obviously the best way, but certainly 9-volt battery is a low enough current, but effective in decreasing the increasing the permeability of the cell walls so that you're able to flush through a process called electroporation, flush all of the toxins and increase the cellular metabolism during the exposure to electrical currents. So there's a lot of, effects from the electricity which are invisible, and the nanoparticles themselves are invisible. But I've developed a way where you can actually, using a silver concentrate, see the electroluminescence of the silver particles and the flashing of those particles underwater with your eyelids even closed. So the intensity of light is not so great that you can see it. We're not speaking about people glowing because of this, but they certainly are in an invisible way. And that, for me, is really unlocking the key to this ancient adage of illumination, and that literal illumination within the body is what these sacred colloids produce, and that's what I'm interested in producing for healing effects in people. So here in Lamana, we're developing an Ayurvedic center for that, and we're going to encourage, freely give this information around the world and encourage other groups to use this to be able to synchronize and align themselves with the changes coming through the enhanced ground currents that are going to be, flashing through our planet and are continually as solar activity increases.
Yes, I agree with you. And there's obviously two ways. I think your ways, in terms of increasing the luminescence of your body is most important. But I've also heard Jeff Renz talk about, putting in a magnetic field around you when he's, a certain bed that you can sleep in where, it can change it can minimize the magnetic field effects of the earth so that you can get a negative effect or something. So I do agree. Speaking of energy, Alex, in your book, Light Water, you state all men are made of earth, air, water, and fire. But in their hearts and in their semen, each man has its own coatl, his own serpent, the energy of Tonatua, the power of the sun itself. This was very striking to me because in many ancient cultures, the reproductive organs have often been worshipped and deified. Semen has the power to create life. Priests practice an act of celibacy to be closer to God. Satanic rituals often involve sexual practices to commune with other dimensions and entities. Yang Qi energy is used or is said to be developed in the sexual organs and through meditation can be stored in the Dantian. In your research, what do you think is the importance of the sexual organs and the semen, apart from the traditional use of procreation? And can you share with us other ways we individually can use our coatl, our serpent, our energy from our eternal sun?
Great question. You started with that wonderful quote, which is from the Pyramid of Fire Codex of the Maya, which is the only accurately translated codex provided by a Mayan wisdom keeper. So I think that quote, among with the others that are so profound from that text, really guide us in understanding what exactly ancient people were speaking about. especially in things like coatl, which I've understood in my writings and expressed pretty clearly my understanding that it's DNA, and they're referring to directly the effect of the electrification of DNA under the conditions that they're creating with their sacred waters and in the sacred temples. And of course, this corresponds to the crystal skull image, which has been usurped by Hollywood to suggest all kinds of things, and obviously associated with death. But the genuine Mayan teachings really show us that the crystal skull is a metaphor for the crystallization of the water in the human body, and that in fact the quartz skull is a symbol of sacrifice, an internal sacrifice for alcohol and all these toxins that people crave. And it's a sacrifice and a purification process that in the Pyramid of Fire Codex is very explicitly talked about as an internal one that is karmic based and that has nothing to do with the misconception of sacrifice as taken in the modern Hollywood take of the ancient traditions were all about heart sacrifice, meaning literal bloodbath, and the skull itself was related to the skull racks kept by some of the Aztec leaders and whatnot. Certainly this did occur, and for hundreds of years, but I believe this is a reflection, just like we have certainly the evangelical people screaming today for war, and we have so-called Christians in the White House who are, killing, millions of people around the planet in their 4-year sport. And I think that, that whole scenario underlies major shifts that are happening in the consciousness of the planet. And I think certainly we are witnessing things that are unprecedented within histories recorded by Westerners, but certainly the Mayan tradition has recorded events like this in the past, and they clearly tell us that it's the movement of our solar system around the galaxy and our interaction with pulsing waves from the galactic core that dictate where human consciousness lies and how human consciousness interacts on the surface. And there's so many avenues to talk about in that direction, but I think certainly the understandings the Mayans present with us frame that where we can make sense of it. And so, of course, I use that in my work very, very clearly, bringing us back to the ancient wisdom so that we don't default into understandings that Hollywood has given us, but we look towards the original root source.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, it is interesting that, obviously, I try to meditate as well. And, I think a big part of that is celibacy. Anyway, let me pass it over to Gemini.
Hi, Alex. How are you this evening?
Doing great, thanks.
Are you familiar with the work of Dr. Philip Callahan and the Druidic Towers in Ireland?
I have just come into a little bit of awareness of it, but I certainly want to look into it more because it strikes a resonance certainly with what I found in my own research.
Sure. Well, how I came to discover him was that he does a study on bugs and their antennas and how through their antennas that they pick up different frequencies of wavelengths and things of that nature. It's really interesting. But Dr. Callahan had stated that it was fascinating that just above the surface of the ground to about 2 to 4 feet up, there is a null of atmospheric frequencies that get stronger and stronger until at 9 to 15 feet above the surface, they are extremely strong. The Irish monks were well aware of this, for that is where they built their high doors. At every tower, they measured that there was a direct correlation between tower door height and the strongest waves. What are your thoughts on the tower's ability to receive cosmic waves and distribute them? Callahan had supposed that they were beneficial for the use of growing crops, amongst other things. And then how do you think this relates to the purpose of the Egyptian pyramids?
Well, that's certainly volumes and volumes can be written about that. I think the towers, the crystalline makeup of the stones used in the towers and in the pyramids structures worldwide, because they all conform to having high composition of calcite and quartz, and these two crystals are known for their piezoelectric properties, which means that they convert mechanical or acoustic energy into an electrical charge and an electrical field. And that happens through a deformation in the crystal where it's literally a matrix that's vibrating back and forth in unison together. That flexation that happens in the crystals, I believe, is what all of these ancient technologies were using to interact with each other over distances in a solid state way. People look at the pyramids and they are not exactly sure how they may have functioned because they figure there are missing parts. And part of the beauty of my work, I believe, is that there's nothing needing to be added to these structures to explain how they were functioning if certain aspects are understood. For example, an ancient lake was surrounding the pyramids, and there was a solid-state cavitating pump below the pyramids. And so I describe that in my book as in relation to John Cadman's work, I believe. Very fascinating research. So all of these things, basically the design, the solid-state design of all of these temples show that they are part of an array, part of a global system, and their geopositions really confirm that. And so certainly the height of doors on the Irish towers and the height of the chambers inside the pyramids themselves, as well as the Mayan pyramids, those very steep angled stairs, and of course the top, the resonant height of those, the resonant rooms atop those buildings were certainly placed there because the energy does increase with height off of the ground surface. And it's fascinating to see, Tesla's towers were developed using the exact technologies that we see at work in the pyramids, although he used crystalline metals, and copper being the primary one. But he certainly grounded his Wardenclyffe Tower into the earth using water shafts into the water table, and we see the same thing in the Egyptian structures. And in fact, worldwide, we find a connection between limestone beds that have high calcite content and tunnel systems that allow water flow through these. And of course, that's, the cenotes in Mexico and Guatemala, and all the Mayan structures are certainly linked into that bedrock and the aquifer. So I think all of these structures having these commonalities really shows us that the ancients knew something that we are just discovering, and I'm glad to have a piece of that puzzle to share with the world. And I think that certainly the pineal gland in our own brain, in the center of our skull, is receiving focused energy that is moving through the calcium in our skulls. And that focusing really is what allows the changes that occur in consciousness through the development of alignment. And when people speak of chakra alignment, and certainly the Mayans do as well, they have words for chakras. They're called chakla among the Mayan culture. And then their word for kundalini is kuntalini. And these are exactly corresponding words and concepts to the ancient Sanskrit traditions of India. So these direct correlations show us that not only are the technologies identical, but the mandala design and the spiritual understandings of the Kundalini culture is present at all of these sites worldwide as well. And of course, anyone who's interested to see will find that there are Buddhist temples and ancient ones in Indonesia, in Thailand, in Cambodia. These places really have a wealth of structures that look quite similar to the Mayan step pyramids. So it's quite fascinating to keep delving into this avenue of research, and there's so much more to be found underneath the sands of deserts and below the continental shelves, because during the Atlantean times, most people were living at sea level, and that sea level was quite significantly lower than it was by hundreds of feet than the present sea level. So it's an exciting time to be researching these topics.
Yeah, it certainly sounds as though it is. Now, are you familiar with the Hutchison effects, where electromagnetic rays seem to be able to move or levitate objects, burn metal, change the structure of items, store energy in crystals, etc.? And how do you think this technology can be used?
Well, I think actually it's exactly taking advantage of the crystalline properties of the metals that Hutchison would use. He certainly used many different objects, and in fact other researchers have demonstrated the acoustic levitation of water, as well as animals have been, for example, frog embryos have been gestated from embryo all the way to tadpolehood inside levitation bubble of water. So the the amazing experiments that can be seen on YouTube, even just checking out, Hutchinson has some amazing videos out there. They show that the normal laws have quantum effects, which once they're achieved, turn gravity on its head. And you see in his videos certainly thick metal bars just creasing, bending, and breaking in half because of acoustic influences. So certainly the pyramids were the perfection of this technology, and what we're doing is like child's play. And certainly the ancient people who used these their primary instrument was stone, and of course geometrically shaped stones. And then the secondary implement were the metals that were used as electrodes exclusively in the buildings. So I think really part of what I'm really looking forward to in this lifetime, being on the planet at this time, is to just watch and see how ancient structures are coming alive, and to be a part of that myself, and to steward that ancient awareness back into common knowledge among humans, because I think this is freedom. And I think Carlos Castaneda, in his conversations with Don Juan, who was a Yaqui elder from northern Mexico, the Sonoran Desert there, in his talks, Don Juan very explicitly said to him, "We know what we are waiting for. We are waiting for freedom." And I know myself, and I've felt in my spirit for many years now, that this is connected with the changes foreseen with the Mayan calendar and in the different prophecies, like the prophecy of the red sky by Apache elder Stalking Wolf, which I encourage everyone to read in length and think about, because this prophecy, as well as many others, were handed down and published in some cases dozens of years ago, in the case of the Apache prophecies in 1920s. And they have already been fulfilled to a startling degree, and there are still yet clues to what has not happened yet that is, according to their track record, most likely to occur. And so when I look at the Mayan track record and ancient knowledge, I find complete corroboration with everything Nikola Tesla was describing and everything that I can discover using modern physics and plasma physics especially, and acoustic physics, of course. So all these things really, for me, are combining to create a wonderful time to witness how, the misuse of Tesla's technologies are falling apart, and those ancient technologies are coming back to life for us. So we get to use these pyramids that have been here idle for so many years unused.
Do you think that the pineal gland in the ancient civilizations was a lot cleaner? It wasn't calcified, so that their ability to use these kind of technologies came easier for them?
Well, I think it has all to do with lifestyle. And of course, many people today are toxified just by their participation in social systems like cities where the water is flowing with chlorine, to toxify their, certainly those things enter. And, the electrification process that I'm speaking about and recommending to people is not compatible with chemical toxification from all of the water systems that we have, which are obviously, flowing with people, with estrogen from birth control pills, as well as drugs people are intaking and letting out into the system. Cocaine, I think, has been measured, and they actually have realized that the amount of cocaine use in countries like Italy is dozens of times higher just by taking estimates of how much is in the wastewater. So, things like this, the level of toxicity is so absurd in modern people that it's very difficult to look at ancient lifestyles and compare them. And yet we have to. I think there's a necessity to at this time. And when we live and look at ancient technologies for living, and of course the word Ayurveda is an ancient Sanskrit word meaning the art of living or the art of being. It really is an art form. And when we look at ancient lifestyles or indigenous lifestyles that are adhered to around the world by many groups still, we see a closeness to the earth that protects these people from the kind of dangers that all of us living in North America, communicating on these cell phones with these computers, are putting ourselves into, we're endangering ourselves with. So, for myself, I am certainly participating in the problem, but only in so much as I'm able to bring a solution. And I see a lot of people out there rehashing information and beating their heads against the wall. And here I am with, lots of new information to provide for people that no one's heard from any other source. and yet none of it is coming directly from me. I'm acting as a channel that's synthesizing information from many sources, including scientific ones, and allowing people to consider this information. So to me, it really has to do, the consciousness changes have to do with us understanding ourselves as spirit, as reincarnated beings that are tied to ancient decisions that affect us today very greatly, and seeing the necessity for ourselves to return to the solutions that provided for our healthy lifestyle thousands of years ago. I think the studies into agriculture and the grain, the use of grains, the rise of agriculture, the rise of the use of money, currency, all of these things, as we've been speaking about, also the value of gold, all of these things have undermined the real advanced knowledge of Ayurveda that pervades so many ancient cultures to this day. And as you look further back in ancient history and uncover artifacts from different continents of the world from the Neolithic period, as I describe and display in my books, they show quite a resonant worldview. And this is one which I've taken to heart, and I'm trying to show people and lead by example on how we can return to this way, because really it's the only viable way, I see through these changes. So it's going to be fascinating to see how long this takes to ground, and it's happening a lot more quickly than I thought.
All right, well, I appreciate that answer. Dr. Judy Wood postulates that the Twin Towers collapsed, or in her term, dustified, due to a directed energy beam. Given your discussion on energy wave effects on metal in particular, can you comment on the plausibility of her thesis?
I think it's plausible and possible, but my initial response to that is, when I look at the scene and that event of 9/11, I certainly am interested in it because of the legal situation surrounding it, and because it is a mass murder. And looking at it in terms of, in terms of criminal law, to me, if there's obvious evidence, like we have a bunch of guys carting out, the melted beams of these skyscrapers that are piled up below, we have them carting them off to China and hiding the evidence. And then we have nanothermite evidence all over the place. To me, that's ample evidence to point to, and we need to keep this, in terms of, the criminal situation. We need to get these people behind bars if that's the only reason to bring any attention to those events. And in my mind, the only way to do that is by taking the most, the present evidence we have and putting that to use to be able to explain how these events occurred. So in my mind, speaking about information or possible technologies that could have been involved, while there's some validity there that could have been possible, to me it's an insult to those who need to find an answer directly to this, and to, wild speculation, which I'm not saying that's what she's doing. I'm not an authority on, what she's published in her interviews, but certainly the idea of directed weapons is a little bit of a distraction from bringing justice to, such a tragic event.
Thank you, Alex.
You bet.
We are speaking with Alex Putney. Alex Putney's website is humanresonance.org. That's www.humanresonance.org. Okay, we're moving to the next section, which is life, form, response, interaction. And the next question is from Green Meadow.
Hi, Alex. This is Green Meadow. I have a question about the sun. We're hearing a lot of fear language from NASA and other sources about the dangerous energies from the sun. And people are talking about going into caves to protect themselves, trying to figure out how to grow plants without being burned by the sun. Do you think people need to protect themselves from the sun's rays?
This is something I've heard a lot of, and certainly the frequencies of the sun have been unhealthy for us for not only decades, but centuries. And I would say thousands of years has passed since a golden era when the atmospheric conditions were appropriate for the long lifespans, the high longevity experience during those epochs. So thinking about high resonance and low resonance periods, I think that the worst is over. I mean, certainly the event of a magnetic field flip, if that's what's actually ongoing right now, those events could open us up to, X-rays and extreme energies from the sun that we're not normally, bombarded by. But part of the, beautiful information that I have to share with people that's supported directly by all the ancient knowledge traditions is that the prophecies of the red sky or the red dawn in 2012 were related to the connection with the Mayan calendar end date. All of these prophecies are describing red skies because they're auroral canopies or complete auroral displays that are not just, swirling in the northern and southern latitudes, but in fact enclosing and enveloping the whole planet. So in fact, I believe we're shifting back to a high resonance phase, at which point those of us who are able to receive the enhanced energies that are coming through because of more infrared light from the plasma, more red light from the plasma overhead, and of course less of the more harmful frequencies of light, for example, probably more UVA and less UVB and C. These changes are going to, I believe, expand lifespans, and that's not conjecture. That's based on experimental technology, which in the laboratory has been able to increase growth rates and extend lifespans. And we're talking by several times. These are not just insignificant amounts of life extension and plant growth enhancement. So I described several of these results in a webpage on my site called, it's about the Godlight, which is a fairly maniacal name, but it's a machine that inventor Troy Hurtubise in North Bay, Ontario, built from an amazing process of dream recording, basically. And it's a plasma beam healing device that I was able to work with. And we got some very fascinating findings that it involves water is the key active ingredient agent. And of course, it's water plasma. So we're talking about an HHO plasma. So these findings and his results using that plasma beam healing device show us that growth rates are possible, enhanced growth rates are possible, and enhanced lifespans as well. So the things that are claimed by the Hopi that speak of the DNA in everyone's body accepting acoustic influences to change spontaneously, those things are borne out by the conditions created in laboratories. So I myself am planning to change my lifestyle specifically to be able to receive those energies in a healing way rather than being cut off from nature, hiding in a cave or a Faraday cage or any of these things. I think that the plants and trees around us are important for us for life, and that's what I'm going to rely on to be eating fruit and to be making through these changes barefoot, drinking the wonderful waters here in Lamana, Ecuador.
Wow. Well, I like your version much better. And I was also thinking about your mentioning of the DNA of plants and animals and humans will be affected. And, instantly there's kind of a little bit of fear because when humans mess with DNA, we kind of make monsters. On the other hand, when I listen to Robert Felix talk about previous magnetic reversals, there's a fossil record of mass death followed by new species. There doesn't seem to be much record of failed adaptations or evolution, just new successful species and some remaining from the prior extinction event. So what do you think will be the results from our DNA being affected?
Well, that's excuse me, that's an interesting, very interesting question, and I've looked at it for several years from the perspective of Russian research, which tells us that the acoustic and luminous influences on developing embryos, for example, can affect their quantum shift their genetic code into not just into a mutation, but into a whole different genome. For example, frog to salamander, and it's talked about by many people. That research is quite famous now. certainly this acoustic technique of developing genetic changes is what the pyramids were all about in my mind. And of course we see the pharaohs with elongated skulls, and we have a long history in the record of the skulls of the pyramid dwellers and temple dwellers in the ancient Andean cultures here in Ecuador and Peru and Chile. All of these traditions obviously were preserving the DNA of these beings in mummies. So not only were the cultures identifying themselves with different genetic codes because of their cranial elongation, but they were also preserving those bodies as evidence of their high culture. And we see that around the world. And of course we see a mimicking tradition of that around the world done by cradle boarding, which is not an acoustic genetic influence. So the Russian research on acoustic genetics has really demonstrated that the pyramids themselves are like kind of acoustic birthing chambers that I describe in my books as acting to synchronize into a heartbeat resonance the mother and the child or the newborn after the umbilical cord is cut and the heartbeat of the mother is not directly located at the root chakra of the fetus as it's inverted in the womb. So that fetus during development has the heartbeat of its mother pulsing right up the root chakra. And in fact, the pyramids of the world are designed to continue that synchronization between the mother and child. And so, this, the genetic influences have been spoken very clearly about by visiting extraterrestrials who, in my book Lightwater, I quote as giving us this same information, that there is a way of removing criminality from a society by controlling the acoustic influences on all of the fetuses being gestated by the members of that society. So that is, for some people, it seems despotic, controlling someone's acoustic environment. It's pretty extreme controls to exercise on someone, and certainly the U.S. government is doing that globally with televisions and radios and all of these technologies. But I believe the ancient pyramids acted in one of their capacities, one of their many capacities, to synchronize the heartbeat patterns of people at temples worldwide. And that this effect not only creates genetic enhancements, but also creates the brain growth enhancements that are apparent in the skull formations that are obviously not deformations, but are functional brain masses. So that, there's so much evidence to be collected there, and I would like to be, among that wave of researcher that's able to collect genetic evidence of these acoustic changes to further support my research. And I'm not just talking about ancient genetic evidence from bodies and mummies. I'm talking about modern genetic evidence where we can use pyramid complexes to adapt and processes using sacred waters to influence genetics positively and demonstrate, for example, in my own DNA, changes that occur, from month to month that can be tracked because, the process of DNA testing is becoming very cheap very rapidly. So I look forward to having direct evidence of these genetic changes in human beings, not just in the laboratory.
Well, there's lots of possibilities in that.
Most definitely. It's an exciting field. I can't wait until more research is made public, but at this point it does seem like there's a lid on it.
Yeah, because it sounds like what you're talking about is ultimate health, because, essentially a psychopath is not a healthy individual. And the kind
exactly. of... Yeah, the information that's astoundingly being given by extraterrestrials in the Billy Meyer case in Switzerland, he has quotes that he's provided where they literally explain that criminality can be rooted out technologically. And when I read that, I was very intrigued and didn't understand at first. And of course, as I learned more and I put together my ideas concerning the pyramids, I realized that the underlying connections of consciousness are what dictates how souls choose bodies in the reincarnation process. And so if you resonate a fetus with certain high resonance frequencies, then you alleviate the dissonance that low-level souls look to connect with. So for example, if a low-level soul is looking to come into our reality, they would bond with low-level, low-resonance individuals, for example, people who are psychopathic, or so, for example, genetic lines where for generations there's been a dominant gene of psychopathy in the family, or low-resonance beings can reincarnate through vehicles created in situations where one of the couple is psychopathic, and the second person in the couple has a recessive psychopathic trait. So the genetics of inheritance of psychopathy is not well studied, but certainly we know from looking at eye color that recessive traits pop up here and there where you wouldn't expect them. And it seems to me in the psychological study of psychopathy that's not exactly applied, because most of the talk about is psychopathy genetic or not doesn't focus on recessive traits versus dominant traits. So I think certainly it must be, and we need to advance the science a little further, because this is not a recessive versus dominant traits is not a new concept at all.
That's an Sorry, this is Jules again, Alex. That's an interesting thought, and I just wanted to see what your thoughts were, having what you just said there in regards to, possibly the extraordinary effects of the center of the galaxy and other stuff affecting people's magnetic field, which makes them disturbed, as opposed to having disturbed people on this earth because of their karma and their evolution in their spiritual life. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think certainly the underlying cause is a strange one, and I think many people may have a hard time putting together two and two when I give this next concept that I've put together. But to me, it does explain the reality of psychopathy in the world that we see today. And I've been reading a lot of interesting channeled material and things, Edgar Casey and things about the Atlanteans to try to discover what kind of karma they may have created that we find ourselves in a situation today where we're surrounded by their ancient temples, which we can't replicate and can't use. I find that extremely fascinating. And so looking at that question, I've basically come to the conclusion that the ancient lore surrounding the idea that the Atlanteans had created a genetically modified slave race to be their, warriors or workers or what have you, that this may have occurred by the mixing of pig genes and human genes, and that in fact the scrambling of the situation and the chaos that ensued after the fall of Atlantis allowed this slave class that was created to basically regroup and create strong genetic lines that were strong in psychopathy, as like attracts like, and basically undermine human history for a dozen or more in thousands of years. So 12,900 years may be is a date that I've zeroed in on that may be close to the fall of Atlantis, and I believe that since that time we've been in a very dark period where this low level of consciousness that was created in many genetic lines by the Atlanteans has now taken power and subverted human consciousness. And of course, if you imagine being in the elevated spiritual state where you can see auras, you know that none of the psychopaths that are standing up on podiums and pretending to be moral people, none of that would wash, because everyone would see that the colors of these people's aura is not reflecting that the fact that they believe even what they're saying, or that they understand what they're saying. So, when people tell me they see auras nowadays, well, I understand that not to be part of the learning cycle that most of humanity is in. And those of us who may have experiences with auras are seeing glimpses of a future reality which we'll all be a part of. But the acoustic changes may dictate that these low resonance beings may not be able to hold frequency in the new reality that's coming. So I believe 2012 will be, the culmination of what we already see beginning, where we see riots worldwide with government policies reflecting complete psychopathic, worldview, where the average person will not adhere anymore to this because the average person's consciousness and their telepathic ability is able to identify these changes and identify the fact that so-called leaders are doing nothing of the sort.
So, Alex, when we look at Egyptians with elongated heads, in the past people have thought that maybe they had alien DNA. So do you think they're natural DNA, or are they mixed?
Well, I think what's interesting is that the technology, we have the Orion pyramids at the Giza Plateau, and they're called, they're now, I refer to that in my writings with that name because of the work of Robert Bauval and the correspondence to the Orion's Belt constellation. So I think that that's the symbolism. Well, first of all, the word itself, or ion, in the languages we have on Earth today, those root words correspond to the ionization of gold. So that in itself corresponds to the technology as I've been speaking about it in the pyramids. But further, it also references this star pattern, and I believe that this technology is an extraterrestrial technology that was brought to Earth, and I'm speaking of the pyramid technology itself. And I believe that it's a direct, it's like a system of ground-based towers for creating the enhanced conditions for the ionization of plasma ships. So that's a whole other topic in itself.
Okay.
But, certainly the changes that are engendered in humans who live in those acoustic and luminous high-energy conditions inside the pyramids, they come from all walks of life the further back you go in history. And I would say that the Egyptians inherited those ancient structures from a previous Atlantean source, and that in fact the traditions of the Egyptians were influenced by more ancient Sanskrit Kundalini tradition, which is why we see horizontal stripes on the pharaoh's dress, which I believe corresponds to the Kundalini cobra, or the symbolism of the activation of the Kundalini moving up to spine. And of course, they have the Kundalini symbol coming out of the third eye chakra of the pharaohs of Egypt as well in their sarcophagi. So I think all that symbolism definitely shows us that it's the same results. The Egyptians were speaking culturally the same results that we have from laboratory experiments, and the Mayans themselves telling us that it's from the coatl in every cell of every living being. And I think that directly tells us that anyone who lives in this sacred lifestyle in the pyramids will have an augmentation of their genetic code as well as their body. And certainly the cranial elongation does seem to be an elitist technology because it differentiates those leaders from others. But I would suggest that was more an abuse of the technology during the Egyptian epoch, and that the ancient Sanskrit tradition involved a more balanced enhancement of the whole brain, especially the occipital lobe, which you'll see in the Egyptian elongated skulls. The occipital is not very expanded, whereas, in fact, in the Mayan crystal skull called the Mitchell-Hedges skull, this crystal skull shows a very, very open and extended occipital region at the back and the bottom of the skull. So to me, that skull and the shape of that crystal skull represents a more ancient, authentic source of this psychoacoustic cranial enhancement.
Wow, that's wonderful. My next question is, I was listening to Ralph Ring, who said he worked with Otis Carr, who said he was a student of Tesla's. And Ring said that Carr did develop a flying machine using Tesla's theories. He actually rode in the flying machine, but experienced cognitive dissonance of some sort. He and the other men were told to hold positive thoughts and focus on a light which changed colors, but they could not remember the actual flight until later. They were waiting for the experiment to start when Carr told them it was over and they could get out of the machine. So then they asked, what happened? Carr told them to look in their pockets, which had been empty when they started the experiment, and each of them had rocks and twigs and other things they picked up when the machine flew to another location. It took them till later to actually remember the flight. Why would the energies from Tesla's machine cause this cognitive dissonance?
That's a very good question, and I don't have an answer for you because there's no physics being related in what's being described in the Ring and Carr story. So I've heard this one myself years ago, and I was very intrigued at first, but as they went on with their story, I realized that there's no details that can be analyzed from a scientific viewpoint.
Okay.
As I understand it, the acoustic levitation of these objects occurs, and Tesla had developed this technology after his research with standing waves. It occurs because of multi-frequency driving of a resonant cavity, or a ship, for example, or a temple structure or chamber. So in the descriptions that were given, they're so vague, and they're given like it's a hypnosis machine, which for me is what the U.S. government would like people to have when they investigate Tesla's technologies and consider his ideas. So I would suggest that the whole tale about cognitive dissonance and hypnosis about what actually happened is actually what the author of these tales is trying to induce in the listener. So I paid them very little attention, and I would encourage people to look into the actual physics papers that I include in my website so that they don't have to listen to such drivel without details, expecting it to have some relevance to them. Obviously, there's no relevance to what that story is providing because no one remembers anything, and they may not have even been there except they had grass in their pockets. Now, that's some unexplainable stuff right there, and I have no way to explain it either.
Okay. I think Jules has a question.
Yes, Green Meadow. Sorry, just one moment. There's just some knocking in the background. Sorry about that. Alex, in regards to your levitation, acoustic levitation, I was just wondering, obviously monks, we've heard that monks can levitate objects, so they're the source of the levitation by the noise that they make through their instruments. But obviously you can't levitate yourself in that same situation. So it's more you'd have to create a levitation field around you to be able to levitate the things. Is that the way of thinking? Well,
the levitation field is none other than the electromagnetic field surrounding an object. So the question of what can and cannot be levitated really has to do with the qualities of the materials in those objects. So when we speak about levitating stones, obviously we're talking about crystalline stones. And I believe that the yogic practices of ancient India and elsewhere around the world in association with sacred sites and pyramids have to do with building a coherent heart field, which of course meditation is well known for. And the best conditions for that are in fact barefoot living in contact, direct physical contact with the piezoelectric temple stones at sacred sites based on a worldwide geometric distribution pattern. So that's a lot to think about, and indeed it's a very complex ancient technology for activation that I'm able to document through my work around the world, showing the similarities at sacred sites, not only in the structures and the technologies, but as well in the cultural icons and the mandala and the different geometric symbols that are sacred to cultures around the world. So in my mind, it's a question of, like I said before, creating a temple of the body, meaning increasing the resonant index or the reverberation time or the electrical capacity of the water in the human body. So those characteristics are what are being referred to in the symbolism of the metaphor of the crystal skull, because they're showing us quartz crystal because it's clear and using it as a metaphor for the clear water that comprises over 70% of our bodies. So the idea of drinking sacred waters has to do with the action of vibration in the system of the human body, and the sacred waters allow that vibration to build and manifest a field that's strong enough to release it from the weight of gravity. And so certainly the ancient Sanskrit-based Tibetan traditions where they use this drone drumming and very loud trumpets and clarinet-like droning instruments, as well as with big drums. All of these technologies are hidden in ritual and fanfare, and yet are very clearly creating an acoustic resonance that in fact, scientists, I have this article posted on my website, a scientist in 1939 was able to document with film and in his written reports specific events of acoustic levitation that were demonstrated in Tibet to him by friends of his. So, in 1939, these films were suppressed, and of course, I believe it was a group called the English Society or something like this, which was obviously a front for these nefarious groups that are trying to hide human consciousness and hide human history, really. So it's a suppressed technology, which I believe once, the awareness that I'm bringing with the technologies of the ancient pyramids and the use of piezoelectric stone bowls, giant stone basins, which have been found at several megalithic sites, including the Egyptian pyramids, and I've written extensively on my website about those. This whole ancient technology, if it comes to the fore, really beggars the question of who is going to be the first person to produce acoustic levitation of a human being on video. When's that going to be on YouTube? Certainly there are people falsifying video and presenting it on the internet, but the physics has been out there and is now well known in scientific circles. And if we can levitate beetles and spiders and things in small chambers using small resonators, when and who is going to step up to the plate to do this in larger objects to prove that, in fact, acoustic levitation can be used viably for transportation and a very safe technology that's being withheld from people. And, of course, NASA and all of these big government groups are involved in the cover-up of this technology. And that's a whole other topic that people can look into to understand what's behind this confusion where, we should be all levitating here, I think.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at, in a sense that, when you talk about acoustic levitation, piezoelectric effect, when you're the source and you're sending that wave out, that standing wave out for things to levitate. Whereas, obviously, there's stories that yogas levitate. Do they levitate the same way, or do they levitate by removing the weight of their body by floating up? Is their levitation similar to an acoustic wave method?
Definitely. Yogis were known to do these feats up on mountaintops and in the temples themselves, and it has to do with the acoustic conditions created in those places. So every time you can read a specific account of any kind of powerful siddhis being practiced by ancient yogis, they're great powers. For example, increasing in size, decreasing in size, flying or running in giant leaps. These are events that are well described and documented in the ancient Sanskrit cultures of Tibet and sub-Himalayan India and other parts of the East. And to Westerners, they simply throw these things out. Well, there are Daniel Hume and many other Westerners who are known and have been photographed in the last 100 years for their ability to levitate. And these are people who were not called frauds because everyone saw them do this on multiple occasions. So this is certainly a reality, and the mainstream media is not going to bring this information to the public, and certainly smaller groups who get a hold of this physics will be doing that, and the question is when and who. And it's a fascinating time to see, because I'm putting this information out. I know how to use it, and I hope others do too, and we can see what's possible.
Alex, this is Gemini again. I had a question about the personal levitation and your thoughts on the possibility of utilizing the Merkaba to levitate, or is it simply a form of reaching higher realms through meditation?
Well, I would say that the Merkaba is like many traditions, like the Egyptian tradition, is a tradition that has lost some of the critical information from its deep roots in the Sanskrit heritage. So I think the Atlantean traditions went far beyond what's expressed in what most people encounter modern times as the Merkaba teaching. But essentially I understand that to be the same as other Kundalini teachings from other cultures, and just as in the process I just described, involves creating the conditions in the body for acoustic levitation, which allows all of these other enhancements in human consciousness that become possible in that same environment. For example, remote viewing, using the energy body, energy double, Reiki healing, hands-on healing. All these, for example, Reiki is never done with the shoes on. It's well known in Reiki circles that just immediately cuts your energy source off. And so, I would like to be able to contribute to those traditions and connect up further wisdom provided by the ancients that shows that drinking chlorine is also not something that should be done for Reiki masters. And there are so many thousands of people out there calling themselves Reiki masters who live in a toxic way. And I'm not, undermining the fact that they certainly produce results, but I would love to be able to share the information that would enhance their results and, create a situation that will allow their levitation, their demonstration of many of the cities which are now considered lost by modern yogis, but in fact must be practiced in different places on the planet and will be more so in the future as the energies increase at these hotspots.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
So Alex, this is Green Meadow again. What are the opportunities that might become available with the 2012 changes?
Well, I just wrote an article trying to address that exact question, and in it I've illustrated what I believe will be happening at the Mayan pyramids and, in fact, at all the temples worldwide. If you visit my page, Human Resonance, www.humanresonance.org/maya.html, there I've got a recent article which connects the idea that high atmospheric red sprites, which have now been recently documented, are in fact depicted in the ancient wall murals and codices of the Maya. And I've been able to pull out several different images provided by the ancient wisdom traditions that directly depict red sprites flowing from the pyramid tops in a standing wave pattern, as I'm presenting throughout my website, using the different geometric and physics papers that I've assembled and put together. So it's an amazing time because a lot of the enigmatic imagery that the Mayans include are now being understood from a scientific context in the high atmosphere. And as I put two and two together, it shows every other prior explanation for these phenomena that have been, for example, encoded into the geoglyphs, like the Aracas candelabra, or what's called the candelabra, which essentially I described in my other article, Levitation Basins article, that these auroral plumes are what are being described as the plumes of Tlaloc and the plumes of celestial water that rain down or flow down from the high atmosphere to inundate the pyramid chambers. So throughout my books, I describe the influence of HHO plasma on the human body, and I connect that with the ionization of water vapor that occurs in the pyramid chambers because of the high energies passing through them. And I believe that all the pyramids of the world act as energy accumulators that allow plasma to interact between the surface of our planet and the high atmosphere. And, this seems far-fetched, but if you look at the Mayan images, it's very clear that they match modern-day images of red sprites forming both in the high atmosphere and at ground level. So the ground level phenomenon is one that I expect to be increasing greatly. And I think the opportunities will be to interact with these high-energy plasmas at pyramids and sacred sites. And it'll be crucial to adhere to the information provided to initiates by the Mayans, because if we don't, we risk, even in the Bible, they tell us that if we don't initiate ourselves properly by eating the manna bread, which I believe contain gold and silver nanoparticles, or the living waters were not consumed, if you were to enter the tabernacle, you would be burned. I can't give you the direct quote, the reference at least. I'm not a Bible scholar, but certainly this is a quote that I cover in my book, and I encourage people to read Lightwater to delve into the details of how ancient people were enriching their foods and waters to enhance the electrical capacity of their body to be able to survive and experience high electrical conditions inside flash plasmas that are forming as discharge events in the pyramid chambers themselves. So that's something that most people are going to have a hard time picturing, and I hope they visit my webpage to look at the images that I've put together to help them interpret these Mayan texts and what might be happening in our near future.
So these energies are going to be around the pyramids. Are they also going to be elsewhere? I mean, what about the other people or the rest of the planet?
Well, certainly the pyramids follow a geometric geoposition system that I've been able to show that modern examples, like, for example, Longview, Texas on 999 a couple of years ago, that event included ground-level red sprites forming that were captured by a game trail camera. So, these are things which I expect to be happening not only at pyramid sites, but at focal points at specific locations, which I'm already tracking on my website. And some of these locations have not yet been recorded with ground-level plasmas yet, but many of them have. For example, in Hope Ranch and in Los Padres State Park, both near Santa Barbara, California, there are areas of the ground that are steaming constantly and causing landslides because over 800 degrees Fahrenheit is being measured in the crystalline bedrock below, 5 feet just below the surface. And so fires have been generated from these locations on many occasions. And it's interesting to note, too, that Nikola Tesla did a lot of his work at his Colorado Springs laboratory. And in fact, a hot spot in Colorado Springs at a playground was identified after a child, his shoes melted and he burnt his feet on the sand in a playground in a certain area of Colorado Springs. So all of these events really tie together and show us that Nikola Tesla was tapping into the energy that the pyramids have tapped into, and that energy is ambiently increasing. And so these plasma formations, I believe, will be affecting people not just at pyramids. It's simply that the pyramids will be the places where we can receive these energies, and in fact, they may be occurring in cities and other hotspots which are going to be detrimental to people who are not practicing sacred temple lifestyles in those places. So part of my task is not only to encourage people to go into the light, into these energies of high resonance that are properly maintained as pyramids, and as well to balance that with the caution and the warning for those who are living in cities and, putting themselves at risk by being around technologies which are not in tune with the changes occurring.
And so what will the positive effects be of this plasma?
Well, right now, experiments have been conducted that we can look at results in the lab of exposure to these plasmas. And in the Godlight article, which I mentioned earlier on my website, Troy Hurtaby's research really identifies the conditions that occur in people exposed to these plasmas. So in his work, he was able to treat people for 7 seconds and have several sessions of that spaced apart by a few days. And he was actually able to, he cured cancer, leukemia, breast cysts were reduced in size dramatically after seconds of exposure. So the case histories are all there in the article for those to read who are interested. What's interesting is that they did experience nausea in those experiments with the Godlight healing device. And I believe that was related to the toxicity of the water in their bodies. And in fact, my further work with these same technologies will involve allowing people to purify before being exposed to those high-energy beam devices using colloidal gold and silver waters to be able to, through electroporation processes, expunge all the toxins in their body that have been stored up from an urban lifestyle. So I think, pharmaceuticals are really the biggest prevention for most people to step into a really healthy lifestyle because, of course, they are hooked into using these things and are not accessing organic, natural solutions that will really become more and more necessary as these changes take hold, not only due to the lack of availability of these chemicals, but more so due to the fact that these chemicals will be penetrating deeper into the systems of people because of the enhanced electrical conditions that they'll be experiencing. So that toxification really determines how you're able to deal with these oncoming energies. And I believe that's exactly why Native American elders and elders around the world from indigenous cultures identify this time as the purification time and specifically talk about the December 22nd, 2012 event as the purification day. And so they are talking very literally about the purification of the energies on the planet, and those super toxic bodies will not make it through. And of course, we see spontaneous human combustion happening today. And there was a couple articles on my website in a row in sequence just a few days ago. So these things are definitely occurring, and I love to be tracking them on my website so people can realize that toxicity is one of the biggest problems that humans face in applying the consciousness that we'd all like to create.
Well, thank you. That's very helpful.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
Green Meadow.
It's something that we consciously understand when we hear, but it's hard in the environment of disinformation that most people encounter to really take it to heart.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question is from Five Cook.
Thank you. Alex, this is a great conversation. So many different topics, and we could go off on so many tangents, and they're all interesting. I have a question from Webbot forum member Plain regarding Joseph Farrell's book, Secrets of the Unified Field Theory. Are you much familiar with that, Alex?
I haven't read the books, but I certainly have seen him speak of the topics, and I understand his angle on the things, yeah.
Right. He basically talks about the physics of free energy that went underground from the 1930s, and meanwhile the pop stuff we have in our public domain is rather pedestrian. So I didn't know whether you had any comments about that. It seems somewhat certainly plausible.
I think it's interesting because some of the things he's speaking about are accurate physics and relate to what I'm describing on my website and my books. Although I'd have to say there's a fair bit of information that I think he's relying on heavily, which is not accurate in my mind and is based on CIA-written cover-up books. So I would recommend that anyone who's interested in the material he's talking about might find a more accurate scientific discussion of the same topics in my book, The Veil of Invisibility, which deals with the assassination of Nikola Tesla and his participation in the Philadelphia experiment directly. As I understand it from the direct confession of Nazi bodyguard of Hitler, Otto Skorzeny, he basically stated to Eric Orion, is an alias of a man who's living in Florida and who was actually dating his daughter, Otto Skorzeny's daughter at the time. He received a deathbed confession which was published in his book called The Bush Connection, and you can visit his website at thebushconnection.com. I think that information is the core information that really drove me to understand the underlying connections that I think people like Joseph Farrell are missing. So I think the Bush Connection is a hard read, and it's given in a language that's difficult to understand when speaking about technology such as Tesla was providing for us and what in fact he had been assassinated for. So that's a whole avenue that most people have not explored and not looked at, and I would suggest that it can be a rabbit hole, and the point of my book, Veil of Invisibility, is to provide the links to things that are known. For example, the Prescott-Bush coup, White House coup, which the BBC reported on and is now well known internationally. Events like this really make people question the reality when we have someone like Prescott Bush, who could have been indicted several times and in fact convicted of funding Hitler, and is suddenly a senator and his sons are presidents. So, situations like this really beggar the mind of anyone looking into the legality of the situation. And of course, the rabbit hole does go very deep, and I encourage people to go there when they have all of the other books that I'm presenting under their belt. Because I think if you want to start on my book, The Veil of Invisibility, without reading my others, you will get quite lost. And that's not intentional. In fact, that book was written later than the previous three books as a way of grounding before I address that material.
That sounds fascinating. I love books about Tesla, and I think most of us are interested in Tesla. Are your books available on your website, or not to turn into a commercial, but where are the best places to get those?
Yeah, they're available as free ebooks, which are downloadable from the PDF link on the main menu of my website. And at this point, I've got 6 books up there, and I'm working on my 7th, and looking forward to getting as much response from people as I can. I've had lots of positive response, and I think things are going really well. And, having an open source like that, I think really shows that, this information that I have, I know it's valuable. It's not just valuable to my bank account, it's valuable to people, and they need to have it. So I've been giving them away free, and I'm very happy to be supported by the universe in doing that, by so many beautiful people who are sharing energy and their incomes with me. So it's an amazing time to, open up these doors and stop the capitalism that has really blocked the truth from emerging.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you. That things do seem to work out. Okay. The next question I have for you, also from member Plain, he was curious. Joe Champion, I guess you've talked about Joe Champion converting copper to precious metals in the past. Do you have any updates on that? Low energy nuclear coal fusion certainly would revolutionize the world.
Yes, and I think it is right now. I definitely have my opinion varies quite greatly from Dr. Champion's opinion, and he stated very clearly that he believes nuclear cold fusion is occurring. I am not of that camp. I believe that, unlike his claim that 2 copper atoms may be fused together to form a silver atom, all of my research shows that the mass of the metals is not getting smaller, it's increasing. So a cold fusion situation would have the metals decreasing in mass, and that's not what I'm witnessing in my experiments. So I have a different take than Dr. Champion does, and I would say that he, in fact, since I've been privy to information, he's closed that down, and he's no longer sharing with the public much information at all, and there's very few updates on his website. And I believe it's because he's now working with a new corporation called Grand Science Metals, which is obviously seeking exclusivity with this, and he's capitulated to that. So it's an interesting position because I myself have verified several of his processes, and they're very fascinating. And I think it is going to be changing the face of how technologies are, and certainly the availability of rare earth metals technologies can apply that in the future. So these technologies certainly will be changing human consciousness, but open source is the way we're going to have to go long term if these things are going to be employed to human benefit, because right now the secrecy with which Dr. Champion is conducting himself is not really, I see, in line with responding to the natural earth changes that we see before us. And, I want everyone to consider this material and look at it and, not take my word for it or take Dr. Champion's word for it. But there are experiments that are out there that I've outlined in my book, Lightwater, and Dr. Champion has also outlined in his publications, which have effectively created transmutation. So the reality of this is here. Whether or not Champion is now open to sharing what he has succeeded in achieving, that opportunity may be closing.
Okay. Well, thank you. Another opinion asking of you. I have a question from member Aviator. What is your opinion on David Wilcock's new book, Source Field Investigations, where he discusses DNA and the link between 26,000-year cycle and the reawakening of humanity via the pineal gland? I know you touched on that a little bit briefly, but do you have much contact with David Wilcock or much of an opinion on that?
No, I think not. I have heard. I haven't read the Source Field Investigations, so I can't speak to that. I have heard some of his ideas, and people have spoken with me about my opinion about what he speaks of in regards to the pineal gland activation. And from what I've seen, I believe he speaks about darkness activating the pineal gland, and I find that erroneous. And in my books published years ago, I basically outlined the concept that it's the psychoacoustic alignment of the trithalamic system, which includes the hypothalamus, pineal, and pituitary glands, and that this system, under the conditions of a heartbeat resonance, like a Native American drumming ceremony, boom, 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 that effect would cause the entrainment, or what's called trithalamic entrainment, which brings the brain into resonance with the heart and the whole core of the brain. So, to me, this effect has been studied and reported previously years ago and coherently interfaces with the ancient Sanskrit knowledge of the chakras, and of course alignment being meant in terms of the synchronization of the pulsations or the rhythms of those different organs, specifically the heart with the hypothalamus, pituitary, and pineal. So trithalamic entrainment, I think, is a crucial concept that is linked in the imagery of the Sanskrit temples because, of course, the third eye pyramid in Egypt, if we believe that the original facade had an eye symbol on one or all four of the faces, that in fact this symbol corresponds to the Ajna chakra of Sanskrit tradition, and which directly references the pineal gland itself. And of course, calcite is the crystal that comprises 90-something% of the pyramid stones in Egypt, and in fact the pyramid stones all over the world in many places. And that is the exact mineral, calcite, that's found as biomineralizations in the pineal gland. So these microcrystals in the pineal gland directly tell us that ancient people knew of the connection between stones and men, and that in fact when the Mayans tell us about their prophecies and coatl, they're speaking about the DNA effect of this connection between the stones, and the idea of the mother stone, literally comes from the nurturing energy of the stone, and the matriarchal matriarch stone, or the mother culture, has to do with ancient civilization that is a Sanskrit world nation that is matriarchal and reverent, has reverence for the stone. So that's that has directly to do with the ancient adage of making the body into a temple. And of course, that's what the Mayans encourage today at their temples when they encourage people to have the water initiation ceremonies with the sacred waters of Tlaloc and the high resonance experience in their pyramids.
Sorry to interrupt, Five Cook. Alex, often reawakening is linked with the pineal gland, but from research from, say, Drenlavo Melchizedek, he talks a lot about the heart chakra and the heart, and obviously instinct. A lot of the instinct comes in the pit of our stomach, in the intestine. So how important is awakening from our heart as opposed to just the pineal gland?
Well, I think the connection there is very powerful, and Native Americans have spoken very clearly in their prophecies and in their wisdom traditions about the connected reality that a person living in a sacred lifestyle experiences because of their barefoot ways and their drinking sacred waters at sacred sites. And they speak about a leader who has turned away from these ways as walking around with his head cut off. And that sounds very gory, and of course will be taken by many to talk about decapitation, as the Mayans are, being painted with that whole tradition, false tradition, which was imposed after the fact. Well, I think certainly the head being cut off refers to the synchronization of the hypothalamic system with the heart, and the head being cut off meaning the rhythms of the brainstem are not connected with the rhythms of the heart. And so that metaphor really speaks true to what we see Native Americans call two hearts, or those who think with their second heart, meaning their brain. The two hearts are not in touch, and they walk the world lost, and they don't know where they belong. And I think we very clearly see this in our time. Maybe 20, 50 years ago, the cognitive dissonance that was being experienced by people was lessened, so it was not so obvious. But I think certainly today we understand that a CEO walking around with his cell phone pasted to his head or to his hip and pagers everywhere, someone like this is certainly walking around with their head cut off. And we now know enough about the physiology of the human body to understand the biorhythmic teachings that are present in the ancient wisdom. So it's it's an amazing thing to be able to look at ancient knowledge in a new scientific light.
Okay, thank you. What do you think of Bert Goldman's assertions of the quantum universe and anyone's ability to quantum jump and perhaps meet their doppelgangers to improve their life and learn new skills?
These ideas actually seem to me to have their genesis in the Nahuatl teachings of the Yaqui elder Don Juan, his ideas were obviously presented by Carlos Castaneda to the world, who was a cultural anthropologist. I think Goldman definitely is staying true from what I've seen. I'm not an expert on what he is asserting, but he seems to hold true to the concepts given in those teachings, and indeed that synchronize with the Mayan calendar, which specifically talk about an energetic body or an electronic body that is a double or a doppelganger, as you mentioned, and that this is the body that is connected by the silver thread, that when one remote views, the energy body is acting as an electrical field of perception that exactly maintains the same shape of the physical body of the being. So anyone who's read extensively of the Castaneda books knows about Don Genero, who was the dark side of the force, if you want to say that, in the different teaching techniques that were used by the Yaqui. And it'll be interesting for most people to understand that when they read those books or think about them again, it turns out that it was described very clearly that Don Genero was there in energy body most of the time, and he was using his double to do the tricks that he did in that blew Castaneda's mind into a new state of awareness, a new heightened awareness. So certainly his ideas are definitely, in line, collinear with what was told by ancient wisdom teachers, and he should certainly be interested in hearing what I have to say and what the ancients have to say directly, which is hidden from most people because the skills that he would like to espouse are ones that need to be developed in very special ways at the pyramids. So that's what I'm intending to do.
That's fascinating. I love the Castaneda books, and Don Genero, as you say, he always seemed a trickster to me. He was quite a character, and so it's funny to hear your insight and take on him as well. Yes. Okay, thank you, Alex.
You're welcome. It's a wonderful book series. I definitely enjoyed it.
The next set of questions is from Gemini.
Hi, Alex. I have a question from forum member Periwinkle, and she'd like to know, have you experienced any levels of intimidation, coercion, or interference in communicating your studies and discoveries?
Sure, I have. And I'd say I've had a lot of caution. I've exercised a lot of caution in the way I publish my information, the way I present myself, and certainly there have been occasions where I get on internet forums trying to share my information, and I find a group of 3 or 4 people just taking the thread in a complete different direction and ignoring the important issues that I was addressing. So, the beauty of having my own website and publishing my own work is that I don't need to rely on anyone else to speak for me. And I would never do so because obviously what I'm speaking about has not been spoken about by anyone yet in the level of detail that I'm presenting. So I look forward to people, being able to investigate these ideas for themselves and come to their own conclusions. And, the beauty of the web that we have right now is that, my work doesn't need to be mitigated by anyone. So, for some who are closed off to the leaps I make between fields of research, and those who would like to close down the synthesis of knowledge that I'm doing, don't really have a means to do so. And of course, my media exposure has been very low, and that's been part of a plan that I have, because I would like to seed this knowledge rather than use it to amass wealth or create inventions to do wonders. Those things are important, but my work now really more so involves identifying the important things, the structures of the pyramids that are lying around, on every continent, in most cases being improperly used and abused, in fact. So, to build a healing device is great, and I'm willing and, interested in doing that. But using devices sitting all around us is really something that I can communicate with people around the world to help them do. And that's certainly going to be more satisfying because it has to do with activating, part of our ancient heritage, which we all deserve to be aware of and to choose from. So the hiding of this information, this information has its time, and the time is now. And so the fact that I'm giving away these things free really means that the information is there for anyone who chooses. And that makes me very happy that the control systems that would be in place have failed here, certainly.
That's wonderful. And then she goes on and asks, Rife machines are able to diagnose and heal human bodies of various diseases. Bioacoustic programs also diagnose. Are there programs that could discover localized planetary imbalances?
I don't know of any that could. Certainly that's an application that would be possible, and I would recommend for anyone wanting to do that. They would have to be based on infrasound measurement devices, which, coincidentally are placed strategically all around the world right now, listening for nuclear activity and low-frequency emanations from bomb tests and things like that. So I think, what we need to do is not build a system to look for local changes, but to use one that already exists. And instead of analyzing the spikes in data, we need to analyze what's called the background data, because that background is the human resonance. This is the Earth resonance that is being recorded full-time around the planet, and that data is not being analyzed. And, we should be finding correspondences in this data stream with the solar flare activity, and all of the changes that we witness in human consciousness can be linked to this. So, for example, in my articles about the NEXRAD weather manipulation now ongoing in the United States, people can find that article on my site at www.humanresonance.org/midwest.html. On that page, I give a very clear description of some of the manipulations that are going on now in the U.S. And certainly this information is troubling for many, but it's important, and I believe that the changes ongoing are going to override any of these weather manipulation schemes that are being, that have been put in place. So I think, part of that, writing those articles are, waking up to people to the fact that, Tesla towers were built. In fact, they were built and re-engineered as microwave towers, which cause cancer for pharmaceutical profit. And as well, they were re-engineered as NEXRAD weather stations, which are, quote, next generation, because they're able to influence weather, not just, observe it. So it's a tangled mess there, but I would definitely suggest people have a lot of reading to do if they want to understand the influences that change locally, not just because of solar natural influences, but because of manipulation systems, put in place by governments.
Okay, thank you. And Perry Winkle also would like to ask, what does changing a person's pH level do to their resonance?
pH is definitely a factor in healing, and it's been found that many of the curative waters around the world maintain a high pH or a high alkaline. Okay, and that's also the case for colloidal waters. The presence of the nanocolloids in the metals in the water in that state actually increase the alkalinity of water as well. So alkalizing the body is certainly something that many different researchers have identified as key. And I would suggest that it's one of the components that holistically can come together to create the conditions for bioelectrification and for biorhythmic entrainment that the ancient Sanskrit culture was practicing all around the world during the Atlantean era. So, I guess that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, Edgar Cayce speaks to that a great deal as well.
Yeah, there's so many tangents I could go off on here, but Yeah, please continue with the next question.
Sure. And then the next question I have is, what are your thoughts on crystals, and in particular, the crystals that have pyramids etched on the surface? Do you believe they hold information from Mother Earth that would be beneficial to humankind?
I think certainly crystals store and transmit information constantly, but I have a more guarded stance as to how healthy it is for people to be wearing crystals. Certainly, most of the emotions that people exchange with each other are negative, and especially as you approach cities and environments like this, I believe most people's crystalline pendants are probably storing the hatred rather than the love that is running through their lives. So I would suggest that they certainly do have an effect, and it should be considered that having pagers and cell phones on your body resonates with certain signals in your environment, and so do the crystals. And so I would say that for example, planting a crystal in the ground may be in fact harming the earth in many cases. So I'm not so much an advocate of the New Age idea presented by many people, including Drunvalo, who suggest that people plant their intentions with crystals. I more feel like we need to become aware of the fact that every intention and every energy we put out all day is being transduced and retransmitted by the human beings around us. And we need to be more conscious of transmitting to the living people we interact with all those energies that people would store in crystals and put into the ground. I think certainly giant crystalline structures are what the pyramids are, and that the small crystals that people love to hold in their hands and hang around their bodies are more symbolic of the power of that crystalline structure. So really the water in our body and the influence that we have when we yell at someone and the effect on their water in their body, or when we praise someone or bless someone, those emotional states are what really, I think, need to be paid attention to.
So cleaning the crystals of their negative energy, do you think that has any merit?
I do, and I think the sun does play a wonderful role in that. Although I couldn't prescribe a specific method, I'm not sure about how that is done. Certainly, water and cleansing with water and sunlight have been commonly talked about. I would suggest too that trinkets and physical objects are often a way that people ritualize or distract themselves from internalizing their spirituality. And so, the idea of wearing a gold ring versus drinking gold and silver colloid that's invisible in your body, I think, one is obviously materialistic and visible, and the other is invisible and spiritual. So I think that, when I think about crystals, I think most people are missing the point, and that might be toys to be set aside until people understand, spiritual energies moving through our bodies more clearly. Those of us wearing jewelry mostly wear metal jewelry, and certainly there are ancient traditions, in fact, that for example, if you have a gem on your necklace, you want to have an open back so that the energies can move through the crystal, or are not blocked by a metal backing. All these ancient ideas are valid, but I'm not sure if anyone was wearing metal necklaces in ancient pyramids. They might have been burnt, just as you would be burnt if you wore a gold necklace next to a wireless tower. There are reports, and in fact in my book I quote a woman who was burned at all of the points where she was wearing jewelry when she was working at a wireless tower. So, that account and the accounts of many other people really corroborate what ancient, like the Bible, ancient books tell us, that you will be burned if you go into these places. So it's, seeing the correlations has really blown my mind and drawn me to unusual conclusions that I think people should consider.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Gemini. For our last question, we'll go to Green Meadow.
Hi, Alex. What are the differences you have noticed among the younger awake population and the older awake population? In my mind, the older generation took longer to believe their own perceptions, and it took more to see beyond the accepted reality. The younger generation that I know seem to see other dimensions more easily. They also seem to be waiting to take action. It seems like they're waiting for an effective timing or a new course of action. How do you see the younger generation taking action? And how are they handling having 2012 come in the middle of their adulthood instead of towards the end of their adulthood?
That's been something that I've been watching with interest, and it's a curious thing because I think, when I look at my own situation and I think about, my birth time in relation to the 2012 event and to see, what's coming, I definitely perceive in my own self a level of cognitive dissonance where if I had tried to come to the plate with these ideas 10 years ago or 15 years ago instead of just 6 or 8 years ago, that even, that discrepancy of a few years would have put me into a totally different place in terms of the response the world is giving me. So definitely everyone is on their own pace of learning, and I think that a major factor in most people's decision to reincarnate is the kind of lesson that they will experience during this transition time. So, often people quote Edgar Cayce or, address his worldview that the Atlantean souls were reincarnating at this time. I definitely see that myself and see that there is a kind of recognition by younger people that they are doing what they can and they will do much more. And it's almost a patience, I think everyone, certainly the older generation that laid the foundation for many of the changes that we are experiencing, many of them have passed and may be coming in, anew, right, with these changes, or maybe waiting, for their next lesson plan to unfold. But certainly, the life lessons that can be learned, 10 years ago versus what will be learned in 10 years from now are so drastically different that for me helps explain, what we see happening in consciousness, or we see cognitive dissonance really culling out whole portions of the population, and we see, younger people coming in with a new hope and a disregard for the mazes that people exposed to modern media find themselves in. So, I've had some amazing conversations with very young people who are very much in tune with what I'm saying, and finding the physics references in the papers that I include in my books is irrelevant for them because they intuitively understand it. So it's very interesting for me to meet people on so many different levels and to be able to speak with PhD physicists and get the opinions of professors and teachers and children. And I haven't had all that much feedback from, diverse parts of society on what I'm doing. But, the connections that I'm making with people certainly show me that, there are so many other young people out there with ideas that are waiting for opportunities to flourish. And I'm, in blazing the trail that I'm blazing, I'm hoping to encourage young people to, do exactly what they feel in their heart needs to be done. And, to disregard completely the financial capitalistic systems that may limit or may have limited people, during the Beat era. So it's a fantastic time, certainly.
That's so awesome. Yeah, it's wonderful what you're doing, and you're just a rich source of knowledge. It's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a long journey, but I'm really glad to have taken my time with it and gone slowly to be able to do it the right way, because I don't want to lose people. I want to bring people up to a level of understanding that allows them to experience the freedom that we're being offered now, and that ancient knowledge, really clues us into. So thank you for, allowing me this opportunity here with all your questions to be able to bring that to the fore.
We've just spoken with Alex Putney from www.humanresonance.org. Thank you for your time tonight, Alex. Though there will be a need for much sacrifice in the coming days, months, and years ahead, everyone should remember this: why be afraid of sacrifice when the soul is forever eternal? To end the show, I wanted to quote a paragraph from Alex's book, Light Water. What is the blood that connects stones with soul, men with suns? It is the universal unity, the one creative principle crystallizing into myriad forms. And when liberated by sacrifice, it returns to unity. Because to sacrifice is to act consciously. To sacrifice that which will be taken away is to deny the destiny that takes it. On behalf of Fox and all the members of the WebBot Forum, thank you, Alex. In our tradition of pie loving and pie making, may you and your family have many pies to come.
Thank you so much. Look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Alex.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Good night, Alex.
Really
That was great.
Thank you. I'll have to re-listen to this thing.
Yeah, I use a lot of words that are not too common, but get your dictionaries handy.
Looking forward to your ebooks, too. Thank you.
All right, you bet.